You check your bank app before you fall asleep. The number on the screen feels solid, permanent, real. But that number means almost nothing on its own. It only means something compared to everything else around it. Here's the strange part. The same thing that decides whether your savings buy a house or barely buy groceries once collapsed an entire empire's economy in less than 2 months. And it didn't happen because of a war or a famine or a plague. It happened because one man was too generous. His name was Mansa Musa. And if you've never heard of him, that's strange, because by most calculations, he may have been the richest human being who has ever lived. Not richest in the sense of stock portfolios or real estate. Richest in the sense that an entire empire of gold answered to him, and he treated it like pocket change.
In 1324, Musa left his capital in West Africa and set out on a pilgrimage to Mecca. This wasn't a quiet trip. Historical accounts describe a procession of thousands of soldiers, attendants, and enslaved servants stretching for miles across the desert, along with camels carrying so much gold that nobody who saw it forgot it. Some accounts describe enslaved attendants carrying golden staffs. Whether every detail is exact or slightly exaggerated by storytellers centuries later, the core of it is not in dispute. Mansa Musa moved like a force of nature, and gold moved with him. Why does almost nobody outside of West Africa know his name? That's the first mystery, and it has an answer rooted in how history gets written, who gets to write it, and who gets left out. But the deeper mystery isn't about fame. It's about what happened when all of that gold actually arrived somewhere.
To understand why Musa had so much gold to begin with, you have to understand where it came from. The Mali Empire controlled access to some of the richest gold fields in the world, hidden deep in forests along the Senegal and Niger rivers. The exact source mines were kept so secret that outside traders never learned their location. Gold moved north across the Sahara on camel caravans, trading hands for salt mined from desert flats, then continued on to North Africa, the Middle East, and eventually Europe. Historians studying medieval trade have estimated that for a stretch of centuries, West Africa supplied as much as half of the gold circulating in the entire Old World. Musa didn't inherit a small fortune. He inherited a tap connected to one of history's largest reservoirs of precious metal, and almost nobody outside the region knew exactly how deep that reservoir ran. Musa's route to Mecca passed directly through Cairo, one of the great trading hubs of the medieval world. And Cairo is where the story turns from a tale of extravagant wealth into something closer to an economic crime scene. The Arab historian Al-Umari arrived in Egypt about a dozen years after Musa passed through, and he was still hearing about it. People he spoke to described a king who gave gold away as if it weighed nothing. Court officials, religious leaders, ordinary merchants who happened to be standing nearby. Al-Umari wrote that Musa left no official in Cairo without a gift of gold. Imagine a tourist arriving in your city and handing out enough cash that everyone you know is suddenly richer in a single afternoon. It sounds like a windfall. For about 2 weeks, it was.
Then the math caught up with everyone. Gold, like anything else, follows a basic rule. When there's a sudden flood of something, and the supply of everything else stays the same, the value of that thing drops. Cairo's merchants had never seen this much gold enter their markets at once, so the value of gold in Cairo crashed. According to the accounts Al-Umari collected, the exchange rate between gold and silver dropped sharply and didn't fully recover for more than a decade. Here's where it gets almost absurd.
Musa, on his way back from Mecca, realized the damage and tried to fix it. He attempted to borrow gold back from Cairo's moneylenders, planning to pull some of it out of circulation and stabilize the market. The lenders, sensing desperation, charged him steep interest. So when Musa repaid those loans, he ended up pumping even more gold back into Cairo's economy than before. The fix made the crash worse. One king, on a religious pilgrimage, accidentally triggered over a decade of inflation in one of the wealthiest cities on earth. Not through conquest, not through theft, through generosity that the market simply couldn't absorb. Does that sound familiar?
It should, because the exact same mechanism is sitting underneath every conversation you've ever heard about inflation, stimulus checks, or central banks printing money. When more currency enters a system faster than goods and services can keep up, prices rise and the currency buys less. Economists sometimes call this a purely monetary phenomenon, meaning it's not caused by scarcity of stuff. It's caused by an excess of money chasing the same amount of stuff. Mansa Musa didn't know any economic theory. He proved one anyway, 6 centuries before anyone wrote it down formally.
Think about what actually happened on the ground in Cairo while this was unfolding. A merchant who sold bread might wake up one morning and find that the gold coin in his pocket buys less flour than it did the week before, even though nothing about his bakery has changed. He hasn't gotten lazier. His customers haven't stopped wanting bread. The only thing that's shifted is how much gold is sloshing around the city relative to everything for sale. That's the quiet, invisible cruelty of inflation. It doesn't announce itself as a crisis. It just slowly erodes what your money used to be worth, one transaction at a time, until someone adds it all up years later and calls it a decade-long slump. Modern central banks spend enormous effort trying to avoid exactly this outcome, releasing money into an economy gradually and watching prices closely as they do it. Musa had no such mechanism. He had a caravan, an open hand, and apparently very little patience for moderation.
But here's the twist almost nobody talks about, and it's the part that makes this story more interesting, not less. Not every historian agrees the crash was as catastrophic as the legend claims. The historian Warren Schultz examined the same exchange rate records Al-Umari relied on and argued that the shift in gold's value was well within the normal range of fluctuation for Mamluk Egypt at the time. In other words, some of what we call an economic disaster might actually be a really good story that grew larger with each retelling, the way stories about generous, larger-than-life kings tend to do. So which version is true? The empire-shaking financial catastrophe, or the slightly exaggerated travel anecdote that snowballed for 700 years?
Maybe both, in different proportions. The gold really did flood Cairo's markets. The price of gold relative to silver really did drop and stay low for years, based on the numbers Al-Umari recorded. Whether that counts as a full-blown crisis or a noticeable but survivable shock probably depends on whether you were a wealthy merchant who weathered it easily, or a small trader who watched your savings lose value
while everyone around you was celebrating a king's generosity. That tension between the dramatic version of history and the quieter, messier truth underneath it is exactly why this story has survived 7 centuries. We remember the spectacle. We forget the fine print. There's another layer here too, and it's about visibility rather than money.
Historians studying medieval trade networks have pointed out that West Africa wasn't some isolated, disconnected region waiting to be discovered by outsiders. It was already deeply wired into global trade, religion, and politics centuries before European ships ever reached its coastline. Caravan routes connected Mali to Cairo, to Mecca, to Venice and Genoa, where mapmakers eventually started drawing a small illustration of a crowned African king holding a gold nugget onto their charts of the known world. That image on the famous Catalan Atlas of 1375 may be the single most concrete piece of evidence for how far Musa's reputation traveled. European cartographers who had never set foot south of the Sahara still considered him important enough to draw onto a map of the entire world.
So Musa's Hajj didn't put Mali on the map in any literal sense. Mali had been shaping the map for generations already. What the Hajj did was force a continent that already half knew about West African wealth to finally reckon with the scale of it, all at once, in a single dramatic gesture that nobody in Cairo could ignore or quietly forget. Which raises an uncomfortable question about how history gets remembered. If Musa hadn't taken that trip through Cairo, would we know his name at all? Or would one of the most powerful, wealthiest rulers in human history have simply vanished from most of the world's memory, the way so many other rulers outside of Europe's historical spotlight have? That's not really a question about the 1300s. It's a question about whose stories get written down, who happens to be standing in the room when the historians start taking notes, and how much of what we call history is really just a record of who got noticed.
Musa eventually made it home. Mali entered what many historians consider its golden age, in every sense of the word. He commissioned the construction of the Djinguereber Mosque in Timbuktu, reportedly hiring an architect he'd met on his travels to design it. Timbuktu grew into a center of scholarship and trade that attracted scholars, students, and merchants from across the Islamic world, building a reputation for libraries and manuscripts that would outlast the empire itself by centuries. The traveler Ibn Battuta passed through Mali roughly a decade after Musa's reign and described a kingdom that was orderly, devout, and remarkably safe to travel through compared to much of the rest of the medieval world. The empire's wealth and reputation outlived Musa himself by generations, even as the precise location of those gold fields stayed a closely guarded secret.
But Cairo remembered him differently. For years after he passed through, merchants there still measured prices against the moment a foreign king nearly broke their currency with kindness. A single act of generosity, repeated at a scale the system wasn't built to handle, rippled through an economy for over a decade. So the next time you check your bank app before bed, and that number on the screen feels solid and permanent, remember that value was never really about the number itself. It's about what happens when something rare suddenly isn't rare anymore. Mansa Musa learned that the hard way, in real time, in front of the entire medieval world. And whether you call it the richest pilgrimage in history or the most expensive accident in economic history, the lesson hasn't changed in 700 years. Money only means something because of what it's measured against. Change that balance fast enough, and even the most solid number you've ever seen can turn out to be far stranger than it looks.